What if you could step into the most iconic tale of Greek mythology? Have you ever wondered what it would truly feel like to carry the blood of a god, where every heartbeat is a reminder that you are both more and less than human? What would it be like to possess a strength that could move mountains, but to also carry a fate that was not your own? A destiny shaped by the jealous whims of those who dwell on Mount Olympus. We're about to journey back to a time of myth and legend in ancient Greece to walk in the sandals of its greatest hero. Before we begin our story tonight, I'm always so curious to know where our community is settling in from. Feel free to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you as our story begins. Now, find a comfortable spot, let the world outside fade away, and allow yourself to relax. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep. Tonight, we'll feel what it was like to be Hercules, a journey that begins not with a choice, but with the thunderclap of a divine birthright. Our story begins in the royal chambers of Thebes, where the air is thick with the sweet, heavy scent of olive oil from lamps burning low against the walls. In a polished wooden crib, a newborn sleeps. His name is Alcides, a name that means strength of Alcaeus, his mortal grandfather. It is a good, strong name for the son of a general Amphitryon. But this child is not his father's son. His true father is Zeus, king of the gods, who had visited the boy's mother, the princess Alcmene, disguised as her own husband while he was away at war. It was a deception born of divine desire, and it would have cosmic consequences. The birth itself was a battle against a god's fury. Hera, queen of the heavens and wife of Zeus, was incandescent with rage. Her husband's infidelity was a familiar wound, but this child, born of a mortal princess, was an unbearable insult. She was determined he would never draw breath. Hera sent Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, to prevent the delivery. The goddess sat outside Alcmene's chamber, magically binding the princess's legs, turning what should have been a moment of joy into an agonizing, endless trial. Days turned into nights, and Alcmene's strength began to fade. But loyalty can be a powerful magic in itself. Alcmene's faithful servant, Galanthus, could not bear to see her mistress suffer. Knowing she could not fight a goddess with force, she chose cunning. She ran from the chambers, shouting with false joy that a boy had been born. Startled, the goddess Eileithyia leaped up, breaking her magical hold. In that single moment of distraction, the spell was broken, and Alcmene was finally able to give birth. 2 sons were born that night. The first was Alcides, son of Zeus. The second was Iphicles, the fully mortal son of Amphitryon. But Hera's wrath was not so easily thwarted. As punishment for the trick, the furious goddess transformed the loyal Galanthus into a weasel, a cruel end for a selfless act. The twins lay sleeping in their shared crib. The cool night air drifted through the open archways of the palace, a gentle breeze that carried no warning of the terror to come. From the shadows, something moved. The cold, slithering sound of scales on stone echoed softly in the quiet room. Hera, not to be denied her revenge, had sent 2 enormous serpents to the infant's crib, a final, deadly solution to the problem of Zeus's child. They flowed across the floor like rivers of darkness, their forked tongues tasting the air, their unblinking eyes fixed on the 2 sleeping forms. As the first serpent coiled and raised its head over the edge of the crib, the mortal twin Iphicles awoke. A sharp, terrified cry pierced the silence. He screamed and thrashed, trying to crawl away from the monstrous shape looming over him. But the other infant, Alcides, did not cry. He awoke with a curious gurgle, his eyes wide, not with fear, but with fascination. He saw the shimmering scales, the darting tongues, and felt no dread. As the snake slid into the crib, his tiny hands, impossibly strong, shot out. He grabbed one serpent in each fist, his grip like iron. The great snakes twisted and writhed, their powerful bodies whipping back and forth, but they could not break free. The infant demigod simply held on, his divine strength manifesting for the first time in a display of impossible power. There was no struggle, no sign of effort. He squeezed, and the life slowly drained from the deadly creatures. Alcmene and Amphitryon rushed in, drawn by Iphiclus's screams, expecting to find the worst. Instead, they froze in the doorway, staring at an unbelievable sight. Their son, not yet a year old, sat happily in his crib, the two massive, dead serpents dangling from his hands like broken toys. In that moment, Amphitryon understood. He knew this child was not his. He saw the impossible power and knew that the blood of a god flowed in the boy's veins. He sent for the blind prophet Tiresias, who came and confirmed the truth. The prophet foretold a heroic destiny for the boy, a life of great deeds and terrible suffering, a path that would lead him to the stars. To try and appease the furious goddess who would forever haunt his son's life, Amphitryon renamed the boy. He would no longer be Alcides. He would be known as Heracles, a name that meant the glory of Hera. It was a desperate, ironic plea for peace, a plea that would never be answered. Knowing that the milk of a goddess could grant true immortality, he crept into Hera's chambers as she slept and placed the infant Heracles at her breast. The baby drank deeply of the divine essence, absorbing a power no mortal could ever possess. But Hera awoke with a start, enraged to find the child of her rival in her bed. As she did, a spray of her divine milk shot across the heavens, creating a shimmering silver river of stars that we know, to this day, as the Milky Way. Even in this act of rejection, a wonder was born. But this early display of power was just a taste of the strength that would define him, a strength that would grow alongside him, but would ultimately be turned against those he loved by the very goddess whose name he bore. As Heracles grew, so did his legend. He was given the finest education a young hero in ancient Greece could receive. His mortal father, Amphitryon, taught him the art of chariot driving, to command horses with a steady hand. The cunning Autolycus, a son of Hermes, taught him the grueling discipline of wrestling, honing his raw power into skillful technique. Yet his incredible strength was always paired with a dangerous temper, a fire that could flare without warning. This was never clearer than in his music lessons with Linus, a brother of the great poet Orpheus. When Linus reprimanded him for a mistake, a sudden, blinding, rage-filled Heracles, he lifted the heavy lyre, the instrument of music and harmony, and brought it crashing down on his tutor's head, killing him instantly. It was a shocking act, a dark foreshadowing of how his divine gifts could become an uncontrollable curse. When the neighboring minions came to demand a heavy tribute from the city of Thebes, he refused to let his people be humiliated. He led the Theban army, single-handedly turning the tide of battle, and freed the city from its burden. His victory was total. He was a hero, King Creon of Thebes, overflowing with gratitude, could think of no greater reward than to offer Heracles the hand of his own daughter, the Princess Megara. For a time, Heracles knew peace. The warmth of a family hearth filled his home in Thebes. He was a loving husband and a proud father to several children, their joyous laughter echoing through the courtyard of their home. This was the life he had earned through his courage, a life of happiness and honor. And from her throne on Olympus, Hera watched, and her hatred grew with every moment of his joy. She could not bear to see the son of her rival thrive. If monsters and assassins could not destroy him, she would find a way to make him destroy himself. She commanded this spirit to descend upon Heracles, not as an external foe to be fought, but as an internal poison to corrupt his mind. One evening, as Heracles was home with his family, the curse descended. It did not come like a thunderbolt, but like a dark, disorienting fog, blurring his vision and twisting his thoughts. In his divinely induced hallucination, he saw his greatest enemies, a host of wild beasts sent to destroy him. He fought with all his might against the phantoms his mind had created, his heroic power becoming a tool of unspeakable tragedy. He slew his children, one by one. In some versions of the tale, his beloved Megara also fell victim to his madness. When the last phantom had fallen, the dark fog of insanity finally lifted. The horrifying reality crashed down upon him. The grief was immediate, an unbearable weight that crushed his spirit. The shame was a fire that consumed him from within. It was there that his cousin, the hero Theseus, found him. Seeing Heracles lost in the depths of his despair, Theseus did not offer empty comfort. Instead, he persuaded him to seek a path toward purification, a way to atone for his terrible deeds. He urged him to travel to the sacred site of Delphi, to consult the great oracle of the god Apollo. The air was heavy with the scent of incense, a mix of herbs and something else, something ancient and unknowable, the very smell of prophecy. He entered the inner sanctum, where the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo, sat upon a great bronze tripod, positioned directly over a chasm in the earth from which divine vapors were said to rise. It was a chilling, echoing sound that seemed to come from the stone around him, the voice of the god himself speaking through her. It delivered his sentence, his path to atonement. His penance was now clear. To atone for his sins, the oracle decreed he must serve his cousin, King Eurystheus of Tyrants, and complete any 10 labors the king demanded. This was the true beginning of his legend. King Eurystheus was weak and cowardly, and he secretly feared Heracles' immense power. He saw the oracle's decree not as a path for his cousin's redemption, but as an opportunity to be rid of him forever. He devised a series of tasks so dangerous, so seemingly impossible, that he was certain the hero would perish in the attempt. He journeyed to the sun-scorched hills of Nemea, a dry, rocky land where the heat shimmered up from the ground in visible waves. For weeks, he tracked the beast, following its trail of destruction, hearing tales from terrified villagers about a creature of immense size and terrifying power. They told him it was no ordinary lion, but a monstrous offspring of the dark gods Typhon and Echidna, and that its golden hide was impervious to all weapons. He finally found the lion, and it was more fearsome than any story had described. Its roar shook the very hills, and its claws were sharper than any sword, capable of shredding bronze armor as if it were cloth. Heracles drew his bow, a gift from Apollo, and let loose a volley of arrows. He watched as they flew true, striking the beast directly, only to hear the frustrating thwack as each one bounced harmlessly off its shimmering golden fur. The lion was completely unharmed. Undeterred, Heracles hefted his massive club, a formidable weapon he had fashioned himself from an entire olive tree. He charged the beast, swinging the mighty club with all his demigod strength. He stared in disbelief as he heard a great, splintering crack. His mighty club had shattered against the creature's head. He had to rely on something else. He changed his strategy, turning from a direct assault to a battle of wits. He followed the lion at a distance, observing it, learning its habits. He discovered the creature's lair, a dark cave that ran through a small hill with an entrance on each side. An idea formed in his mind. The air was thick with the smell of dust and the heavy animal musk of the lion. His eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom, and he saw the beast waiting for him, its eyes glowing like embers in the dark. There would be no weapons here, only strength against strength. He lunged forward and wrestled the lion in the close, claustrophobic confines of the cave. He felt its impenetrable fur under his fingers as he struggled to find a grip, its razor claws tearing at his skin. The beast was immensely powerful, but Heracles was the son of Zeus. He wrapped his massive arms around the lion's thick neck, locking them in a chokehold. The monster thrashed and roared, but it could not break his grip. Heracles squeezed, his muscles straining, cutting off the great beast's breath until, at last, its struggles ceased and it fell limp in his arms. His knife could not pierce the hide, nor could his sharpest arrowheads. He sat for a time, pondering the puzzle, and then a clever idea struck him. He carefully took one of the lion's own immense razor-sharp claws and used it to slice into the magical, impenetrable hide. It worked perfectly. From that day forward, he would wear its golden pelt as his signature armor, the head of the great beast serving as a helmet. It was a symbol of his first great victory, a trophy earned, not just with strength, but with intelligence and resolve. He was so shocked that Heracles had succeeded that he forbade him from ever entering the city gates again. From now on, he was to display the proof of his labors outside the walls. For his second labor, Eurystheus devised an even more horrifying task. He sent Heracles to the swamps of Lerna to destroy the Hydra, a multi-headed serpent whose very breath was poison. Our journey now takes us into the foul swamps of Lerna, a place of stagnant water and creeping decay. The putrid smell hung heavy in the air, a sickening mix of rot and marsh gas. Here, in the dark waters, lived the Lernian Hydra. The creature was a living nightmare. It possessed numerous serpentine heads. Some myths say 9, others say as many as 100. And for every head that was cut off, 2 more would immediately grow in its place. To make it truly invincible, its central head was immortal and could not be destroyed by any means. Its blood and breath were so venomous that even its scent, carried on the wind, could be deadly. For this labor, Heracles was not alone. He was accompanied by his loyal nephew, Elos. As they approached the beast's lair near the murky springs of Lerna, Heracles knew he needed a way to draw the creature out into the open. Hissing with rage, the Hydra emerged, its dozens of serpentine heads weaving through the air, the sound echoing across the marsh. The sight was terrifying. The slick, marshy ground underfoot made fighting treacherous and unstable. Heracles moved in, his lion skin protecting him from the snapping jaws, and began his assault. He swung his new club, smashing the creature's heads one by one. But for each one he destroyed, he watched in growing frustration as 2 more sprouted from the bleeding stump, stronger and more aggressive than before. He was not winning. he was making the monster more powerful. As if the regenerating heads were not enough, Hera sent more help for her creature. A giant crab, Carcinus, scuttled out of the swamp and began pinching at Heracles' feet, trying to throw him off balance. But the main problem remained. He was losing ground, and the Hydra's poisonous breath, a foul, acrid stench that burned the eyes and throat, was beginning to weaken him. It was then that he learned a vital lesson, that even the world's strongest man cannot overcome every challenge alone. His nephew, Iolaus, seeing the futility of the fight, had a crucial idea. As Heracles did so, Iolaus rushed in with a flaming torch, or firebrand, and immediately cauterized the bloody stump. The searing heat and the smell of burning flesh filled the air as the wound was sealed, preventing any new heads from growing. They had found the solution. They began to work in perfect tandem. Heracles would smash or slice off a head, and Iolaus would instantly press the firebrand to the neck. One by one, the hissing heads were destroyed until only one remained, the central, immortal head. Knowing he could not destroy it, Heracles used his immense strength to sever it from the body and then buried it deep beneath a massive boulder, where it could harm no one. He took his arrows and dipped their tips into the Hydra's toxic blood, creating a weapon of incredible lethality. This act would give him a powerful advantage in the labors to come, but it also sowed the seeds of a future tragedy. A theme we'll see repeated in the life of a demigod, where every victory seems to carry the price of a future sorrow. It's fascinating how these early tasks weren't just about strength, but about adapting to the impossible. Have you ever faced a problem that forced you to completely rethink your approach? It's a powerful moment when we realize our usual methods just won't work. As we move on, we'll see how Hercules' challenges grow, not just in scale, but in complexity. Heracles had proven his strength against monsters of mythic power. He had overcome the invincible lion and the regenerating Hydra. But King Eurystheus, growing ever more fearful and resentful, knew that the hero's might was not his only quality. He possessed a pride that could be wounded, a sense of honor that could be attacked. And so, for the fifth labor, the king devised a task intended not to kill Heracles, but to humiliate him, to bury the celebrated hero under a mountain of filth. He was commanded to travel to Elis and clean the stables of King Augeas in a single day. This was no ordinary chore. King Augeas was a man of immense wealth, and his greatest treasure was a massive herd of divine cattle, said to be immortal and forever free from disease. These magnificent animals, numbering over 3,000, were housed in a sprawling complex of stables and yards. But for over 30 years, these stables had not been cleaned. Not once. When Heracles arrived, he was met with a sight and a smell that would have stopped any mortal man in his tracks. The overwhelming, eye-watering stench of decades of accumulated filth was a physical force, a cloud of foulness that hung over the entire valley. The lowing and stamping of the thousands of immortal cattle echoed from within the soiled walls. Eurystheus had imagined Heracles on his hands and knees, scooping filth with a shovel for endless hours, a degrading and impossible task. But Heracles had no intention of being disgraced. Standing under the hot sun, he assessed the situation not as a laborer, but as a general assessing a battlefield. He saw the problem not as one of filth, but of physics. He approached King Augeas not with a shovel, but with a proposition. He offered the king a deal. He would clean the stables completely in a single day, and in exchange, he would receive 1/10 of the divine herd. Augeas, a proud and greedy king, looked at the mountains of waste that filled his property, and then at the single man standing before him. Believing the task to be utterly impossible, he laughed and readily agreed to the terms, even calling his son as a witness to the wager. With the deal struck, Heracles did not pick up a single tool of a common laborer. Instead, he walked to the foundations of the great stables. With his bare hands, he tore 2 massive holes in the stone walls, one on each side of the vast complex. Then he strode to the 2 rivers that flowed through the nearby plains, the Alpheus and the Peneus. With his demigod strength, he lifted boulders and dug new channels, redirecting the powerful currents of both rivers from their ancient courses. A deep, rumbling sound echoed through the valley as the landscape was altered by his power. He rerouted their flow directly towards the opening he had made in the stable walls. The result was immediate and spectacular. An immense, rushing roar of water, the combined force of 2 rivers, flooded through the stables. This cleansing torrent was more powerful than 1,000 men with 1,000 shovels. It scoured the stone floors, washed away the grime of 30 years, and carried every last trace of filth out the other side and down into the plains below. In a matter of hours, the job was done. The stables were cleaner than they had been in a generation. Heracles presented himself to King Augeas to collect his payment. But the king had learned that Heracles was performing the task as a labor for Eurystheus, claiming that the hero was already under contract. Augeas refused to honor their agreement and angrily banished Heracles from his kingdom. To make the betrayal complete, when Heracles returned to his cousin, Eurystheus also declared that the labor did not count. He argued that Heracles had worked for payment, even though he never received it, and therefore it could not be considered part of his penance. The injustice was clear, but Heracles had no choice but to accept it. Having proven his mind was as mighty as his muscles, his next journey would require a different skill entirely, diplomacy, as he traveled to the land of the Amazons. The 9th labor took Heracles farther than ever before, across the sea to the shores of the Black Sea. His task, assigned on the whim of King Eurystheus's daughter, Admete, was to retrieve the girdle of Hippolyta. Admete had heard tales of this famous artifact and coveted it for herself. But this was no simple trinket. It was a magnificent leather belt, adorned with precious stones, that had been a gift to the Amazon queen Hippolyta from her father, Ares, the very god of war. It was the ultimate symbol of her authority and her divine right to rule. Heracles gathered a band of heroes, including his friend Theseus, and they set sail. After a long voyage, the scent of salt on the sea breeze told them they were approaching their destination, the Amazon capital of the Masira. As their ship drew near the shore, they saw them. The formidable Amazon warriors, clad in leather and bronze, were a breathtaking sight. Their skill with the bow and on horseback, legendary throughout the known world. Heracles had come prepared for a battle, but he hoped to avoid one. He went ashore to meet with Queen Hippolyta, and the meeting was, at first, a surprising success. The queen was not a savage warlord, but a dignified and powerful ruler. She was impressed by the tales of Heracles' strength and nobility. When he explained the nature of his quest, telling her of his penance and the reasons for his journey, she listened with a calm and understanding grace. Her voice was dignified as she spoke, and to Heracles' relief, she willingly agreed to give him the girdle as a gift, a token of respect from one great leader to another. It seemed this labor would be accomplished through peace and mutual admiration, but Hera was always watching. The goddess could not stand to see Heracles succeed so easily, especially in a venture that might bring him honor instead of bloodshed. She descended from Olympus, cloaked in a disguise, appearing as a common Amazon warrior. Moving quickly through the city, she spread a vicious rumor. She told the other Amazons that Heracles was a liar and a trickster, that his true purpose was not to retrieve a girdle, but to abduct their beloved queen and carry her away as a prize. Panic and rage spread like wildfire. The Amazons, fiercely loyal to their queen, felt a deep sense of betrayal. The sudden, frantic clang of alarm bells and war horns shattered the peaceful afternoon. Believing their queen was in danger, they armed themselves and charged down to the beach. A wave of furious warriors intent on destroying Heracles' ship and saving Hippolyta. Aboard his ship, Heracles saw the charging army. He had just left a peaceful meeting, and now he saw the same warriors coming to kill him. In the chaos, he could only assume the worst. He believed that Hippolyta's kindness had been a ruse, a clever trap to lower his guard before she ordered his death. He felt that he had been betrayed. When Hippolyta herself came running towards the ship, perhaps to find out what the commotion was about, Heracles acted in the heart-pounding intensity of the battle. He saw her not as the queen who had offered him a gift, but as the commander of the army attacking him. In the ensuing fight, he tragically struck down and killed Queen Hippolyta. In her final moments, there was surely a look of confusion and betrayal on her face. Heracles took the girdle from her by force, and then, with a heavy heart, fought his way through the enraged Amazon warriors and back out to the open sea. This tragic outcome was a painful reminder that Hera's curse followed him everywhere, twisting peace into violence and understanding into suspicion. His next labor would take him even farther, to the very edge of the setting sun, to an island that existed more in myth than on any map. For his 10th labor, Heracles was ordered to journey to the mythical red island of Erythea, located in the far western ocean beyond the pillars that marked the end of the known world. There, he was to steal the magnificent herd of red cattle belonging to Gyrion, a monstrous giant who was the grandson of the Gorgon Medusa. The journey itself was an epic trial. To reach the western ocean, Heracles had to cross the vast and desolate Libyan desert. For days he walked, the oppressive, blinding heat of the sun beating down on him without mercy. The endless sand and shimmering air pushed him to his limit. In a moment of pure demi-god audacity, his frustration boiled over. He drew his bow, aimed it at the sky, and fired an arrow directly at Helios, the sun god himself. Helios, rather than being offended, was so impressed by the hero's sheer nerve that he decided to help him. He lent Heracles his great golden chariot, which in some versions is described as a giant golden cup that he used to sail across the sky each day. Heracles boarded the divine vessel and sailed not through the sky, but across the ocean. It was a surreal sight, a lone hero gliding over the waves in a cup that glowed with the light of the sun, heading towards a place no mortal had ever seen. He finally arrived on the shores of Erythea, the Red Island. The place was unnatural, dreamlike. The earth and the grass glowed with a strange crimson color, as if forever stained by the setting sun. The lowing of the magnificent red cattle echoed across the strange landscape, a beautiful and eerie sound at the edge of the world. He had little time to take in the scenery. He was immediately confronted by the guardians of the herd. First came Orthrus, a fearsome two-headed dog, the brother of Cerberus, the hound of the underworld. Heracles wasted no time, killing the beast with a single crushing blow from his trusty olive-wood club. As the dog fell, the herdsman, Eurytion, rushed to its aid, and he too was quickly killed. The commotion alerted the master of the island. Geryon appeared, a creature from a nightmare. He had a single pair of legs, but from the waist up he had 3 separate bodies, with 6 arms. He armed himself with 3 shields and 3 spears, and advanced on Heracles. His movements were bizarre and disjointed, a chaotic storm of limbs and weapons. Heracles stood his ground against the monster. He dodged the flurry of spears and shields, waiting for his moment. He drew his bow, knocked one of the arrows he had dipped in the Hydra's lethal venom, and let it fly. The arrow, guided by fate and a hero's skill, struck Geryon with incredible force, piercing through one of his bodies, then the second, and then the third, killing the giant instantly. His task on the island was complete, but the labor was far from over. The return journey was fraught with its own challenges, as Hera continued to torment him. She sent a stinging gadfly to madden the cattle, causing the herd to scatter across the lands of Europe. Heracles had to painstakingly track them all down. Then she sent a flood to raise a river to an impassable level, and Heracles had to pile stones in the riverbed to build a causeway for the herd to cross. Eventually, after a long and difficult journey, he delivered the red cattle to Eurystheus, who promptly sacrificed them to Hera. Having journeyed to the end of the mortal world, Heracles' final labors would require him to transcend it, first by dealing with the gods themselves, and then by descending into the land of the dead. For his 11th and seemingly penultimate labor, Heracles was given a task that sounded more like a fairy tale than a hero's quest. He was to bring back the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides, but these were no ordinary apples. They grew on a sacred tree that was a wedding gift from Gaia, the Earth Mother, to Hera when she married Zeus. The garden itself was located at the western edge of the world, a magical place tended by the Hesperides, beautiful nymphs of the evening and twilight. And guarding the tree itself was Ladon, a massive, terrifying, 100-headed dragon that never slept. Stealing from Hera's own wedding tree was Heracles' most dangerous insult to the goddess yet. The first problem was that no one knew where the garden was. His quest first became a search for knowledge. He was told to find Nereus, the wise and ancient old man of the sea, a god who could change his shape at will. Heracles found him sleeping on the shore and seized him. The sea god instantly transformed, shifting from a lion to a snake, to fire, to water. But Heracles held on with his unbreakable grip until the god gave up and revealed the garden's location. On his long journey, he passed through the Caucasus Mountains and came upon a sight of great sorrow. There he found the Titan Prometheus, chained to a rock as eternal punishment for giving fire to mankind. Every day, a great eagle would descend and eat the Titan's liver, which would regrow overnight, only for the torment to repeat. Moved by the Titan's suffering, Heracles drew his bow and killed the eagle, freeing Prometheus from his daily agony. In profound gratitude, Prometheus offered Heracles some crucial advice. He warned him not to try and take the apples himself, for the garden was a place of divine magic. Instead, he should seek the help of the Titan Atlas, whose daughters, the Hesperides, tended the garden. Heracles found Atlas at the edge of the world, a figure of immense power and eternal despair. He was the Titan condemned by Zeus to hold the heavens upon his shoulders for all time. Heracles approached him with an offer. If Atlas would go into the nearby garden and fetch the golden apples for him, Heracles would take his burden and hold up the sky in his place. Atlas, desperate for even a moment's respite from his crushing load, eagerly agreed. Slowly and carefully, the great burden was shifted. The moment the weight of the heavens settled upon Heracles, he understood true suffering. It was an immense, crushing, and unimaginable weight, a pressure that threatened to grind him into dust. It was the weight of every star, every cloud, every inch of the blue expanse, but he held strong. Atlas, meanwhile, feeling freedom for the first time in ages, walked into the shimmering, magical light of his daughter's garden. It was a place where it was always twilight, and the sound of the nymphs' beautiful, ethereal singing floated on the air. He passed the low, deep rumble of the 100 heads of the dragon-laden, each whispering a different threat, and easily plucked 3 golden apples from the tree. He returned to find Heracles straining under the cosmic load. But Atlas had no desire to take his burden back. He told Heracles he would deliver the apples to Eurystheus himself, and that Heracles could just keep holding the sky. It was a clever trap, but Heracles was now as cunning as he was strong. He pretended to agree, but made one small request. He asked Atlas if he could just take the sky back for a single moment, so that he could adjust his lion-skin cloak to make a better cushion for his shoulders. The unsuspecting Atlas, thinking little of it, took back the heavens. The moment he did, Heracles simply picked up the golden apples, thanked the Titan for his help, and walked away. He had held the sky, freed a Titan, and outwitted another. Only one challenge remained, the most terrifying of all, to conquer death itself by descending into the shadowy realm of the underworld. It's really something to see how Hercules evolves, isn't it? From pure force against the lion to outwitting a Titan. It makes you think about how our own challenges shape us, teaching us new ways to be strong. We've seen him face monsters and gods, but what happens when he must face the underworld itself? Having conquered the known world, Heracles now faced a challenge that required him to leave it behind. For his 12th and final labor, King Eurystheus, in a final act of desperate malice, commanded him to descend into the darkness of the underworld and bring back its 3-headed guard dog, Cerberus. This was a journey from which no mortal had ever returned, a path that led through the very heart of death itself. But Heracles, ever resolute, began his preparations not by sharpening a sword, but by purifying his soul. He traveled to Eleusis and sought initiation into the sacred Eleusinian mysteries, ancient rites that promised initiates a greater understanding of the cycle of life and death. He learned the secret pathways and rituals that might allow a living man to walk in the land of the dead and, perhaps, return. His journey began under the silent watch of 2 powerful gods. He was guided by Hermes, the gentle messenger who leads souls to their final rest, and watched over by his constant protector, the wise goddess Athena. Together, they led him to a hidden entrance, a dark cavern that breathed a chilling cold, a cold untouched by any sun. He journeyed down into the echoing darkness until he reached the banks of an oily, black river. This was the river Styx, the boundary between life and death. Here, the gaunt figure of Charon, the ferryman, waited, his skeletal hands resting on his long pole. Heracles paid the ferryman his toll and was pulled across the dark, silent water, leaving the world of warmth and light behind him. The atmosphere of the underworld was one of profound, echoing silence, broken only by the faint, dry whispers of the shades of the dead. As Heracles, a being of warm blood and vibrant life, walked among them, they fled from his presence like dry leaves in a wind. He saw the faces of fallen friends and vanquished foes, their features pale and indistinct, their passions and hatreds now just faint memories. In a strange and somber encounter, he even engaged in a wrestling match with the ghostly shade of the hero Meleager, a contest of strength with no weight or substance. Venturing deeper, he found his cousin, an old friend Theseus, trapped in the darkness. Years before, Theseus had foolishly attempted to abduct Persephone, the queen of this realm, and as punishment he had been magically bound to a chair of forgetfulness, doomed to sit for eternity. With a mighty effort, Heracles strained against the divine magic, his muscles bulging as he pulled his friend free from the stone, rescuing him from an eternal fate. Finally, he stood before the obsidian throne of Hades and his queen, Persephone. He did not approach them with arrogance or threats, but with a quiet respect for their domain and their power. He explained his quest, the final labor of his long penance. Hades, the stern king of the dead, was impressed by the hero's courage and his dignified politeness. He agreed to let Heracles attempt the task, to borrow the guardian of his gates. But he gave one single formidable condition. He must subdue the beast without the use of any weapons. Heracles agreed. He traveled to the gates of Acheron, where the monstrous hound of hell kept its vigil. Cerberus was a terrifying sight, a massive dog with 3 snarling heads, a tail that was a living serpent, and a mane of writhing snakes. The moment it saw him, it let out a deafening series of barks, a sound of pure damnation that echoed through the lifeless caverns. Heracles braced himself, protected only by his impenetrable lion-skin cloak, and lunged. He wrestled the great beast, its 3 heads snapping and biting, its serpent tail whipping and striking. He ignored the bites and the stings, focusing all of his immense strength on its powerful body. He wrapped his arms around the creature's necks and squeezed with all his might. The beast struggled and howled, but slowly its power began to fade under the impossible pressure. He squeezed the beast into submission, and then, half carrying, half dragging the whimpering guardian of hell, he began the long journey back to the surface. He emerged into the sunlight, the monstrous dog blinking and snarling in the unfamiliar brightness. He presented the beast to King Eurystheus, who took one look at the 3-headed monster from the depths of hell and shrieked in terror. The cowardly king leaped into a large, bronze storage jar, hiding from the sight, begging Heracles to take the creature away. Heracles dutifully returned Cerberus to the underworld, his final labor complete. Having completed the final labor and shown hell itself to his cowardly master, Hercules was finally free. His penance was paid, his sins atoned for. But for a man defined by struggle, the quiet landscape of peace would prove to be the most challenging territory of all. His great odyssey of penance was over. Heracles was free, but he was also adrift. For years, his life had been a series of impossible tasks. Now, without a quest, he wandered, a hero without a purpose, seeking a way to build a new life, to find a peace that had so long been denied him. His journey led him to the kingdom of Ochelia, ruled by King Eurytus, the very man who had once taught him the art of archery. It was here that he saw the king's beautiful daughter, Iole, and fell in love. Eurytus, proud of his own skill with the bow, offered his daughter hand in marriage to any man who could defeat him and his sons in an archery contest. Heracles, the world's greatest archer, accepted the challenge. The contest was held in the great hall of the palace. We can imagine the taut stretch of the bowstring as he drew it back, the quiet focus in his eyes, and the satisfying, solid thump of arrow after arrow hitting the very center of the mark. He won, easily and decisively. But as he stood victorious, the prize was denied him. A quiet, tense atmosphere fell over the royal hall. King Eurytus refused to allow the marriage. He remembered the story of Megara and their children, and he voiced a terrible fear that Heracles would one day suffer another fit of madness and bring the same tragic fate upon Iole. The insult was deep and bitter. Heracles left the kingdom with a heavy heart and a simmering rage. Shortly after, some of the king's prized horses were stolen. One of Eurytus's sons, a young man named Iphitus, who believed Heracles was innocent, sought out the hero to ask for his help in finding them. But when he found Heracles, the hero's grief and anger over the insult had festered into a dangerous fury. In a sudden fit of rage, he seized Iphitus and threw him from the high walls of the city, killing him. It was a horrifying act, a murder made even more sinful because it violated the sacred laws of hospitality. To purify himself of this new and terrible crime, Heracles was told by the oracle that he must be sold into slavery for 1 year. He was purchased by Omphale, the queen of Lydia. For the world's strongest man, it was the ultimate humiliation. The queen forced him to wear women's clothing and perform domestic chores alongside her handmaiden. We can imagine the strange and uncomfortable feeling of soft, luxurious silks against his warrior skin as he was made to spin wool and serve the queen. It was a year of quiet shame, a harsh lesson in humility. After his servitude was complete, he continued his wandering, his spirit now humbled. His travels eventually brought him to the land of Caladan, where he met and fell in love with the beautiful princess Deianira. She was his new hope, a promise of a new, peaceful life. But he was not her only suitor. To win her hand, he had to fight the powerful river god. The battle was an epic one. The god was a shapeshifter, a being of primal power. He first turned into a giant coiling snake, which Heracles wrestled as he had the serpents in his crib. Then Achilles transformed into a massive, roaring bull. During the fierce struggle, filled with the sound of rushing water and the roar of the beast, Heracles seized the bull by its horns and, with a final surge of strength, broke one of them off. Defeated, the river god yielded. Heracles had won his bride. With the warmth and feel of Deianira's hand in his, it seemed Heracles had finally found the peace he had sought for so long. They married and started a family. But a chance encounter with a cunning centaur would plant a seed of jealousy and distrust that would ultimately bring about the hero's doom. For a time, life was calm. Heracles and his new wife Deianira traveled together, building a life far from the courts of resentful kings and the shadows of his past labors. One day, their journey brought them to the banks of the river Evenus, a wide and fast-flowing river. A centaur named Nessus worked there as a ferryman, offering to carry travelers across the powerful, cold current. Nessus, seeing the beautiful Deianira, made a seemingly kind offer. He would carry the princess across on his strong back, while Heracles, with his great strength, could swim across on his own. Heracles agreed and waded into the river, but as Nessus reached the middle of the stream, he was overcome with lust. He abandoned his duty as a ferryman and tried to assault Deianira. Her frightened cries echoed across the water. instantly reaching Heracles on the far bank. In a flash, the hero's calm demeanor vanished. He pulled an arrow from his quiver. One of the arrows he had long ago dipped in the lethal venom of the Lernaean hydra. He took aim, and the arrow flew with a swift, deadly whistle, striking the centaur squarely in the chest. The wound was fatal, the poison incurable. As Nessus stumbled to the riverbank, his life draining away, his final thoughts were of revenge. With his dying breaths, he called out to Deianira. He spun a masterful lie, his voice smooth and reassuring. He told her that his blood, now magically mixed with the Hydra's powerful venom, was not a poison, but a potent love potion. He whispered to her that if she collected some of it, and if she ever felt that Heracles' love for her was fading, she should spread it on his tunic. He promised it would bind his heart to her and ensure his faithfulness forever. Deianira, young and deeply in love, was also deeply insecure. She knew her husband was the greatest hero in the world, desired by mortals and goddesses alike. The thought of losing him was her greatest fear. And so, in a moment of secret desperation, she believed the dying centaur's lies. As Heracles was making his way across the river, she took a piece of cloth and soaked it in the dark, toxic blood, hiding it away. She kept this charm for many years, a dark secret she hoped she would never have to use, a forgotten seed of doubt planted by a masterful, long-term revenge plan. That vial of blood would remain hidden for years, a forgotten relic of a violent day. But when rumors of Hercules' old love for Iole reached Deianira's ears, her fear and jealousy would lead her to unleash the centaur's final, terrible revenge. Years passed peacefully, but the ghost of Heracles' past was not yet finished with him. In a final, brutal campaign, he conquered the kingdom of Oechalia, the land of the king who had once denied him his daughter's hand. He took the Princess Iole, the love he had lost so long ago, as a captive of war, intending to bring her into his household. He sent a messenger ahead to his home to announce his victory and to bring him a fine, clean robe to wear for a sacrifice of thanks to his father, Zeus. When the messenger arrived and told Deianira the news, her world crumbled. She saw Iole not as a prisoner, but as a rival who would steal her husband's heart. Her deepest fears, planted years ago by a dying centaur, now blossomed into panic. Racked with jealousy, she remembered Nessus's treacherous gift. She retrieved the dark, clotted blood and smeared it on the inside of the soft, rich tunic the messenger was to take back to her husband. She gave it to him, believing she was not committing an act of harm, but an act of magic to save her marriage. Heracles received the robe as he stood before the sacrificial altar. The air was filled with the smell of incense and roasting meat. At the height of his triumph, he took off his lion skin and put on the beautiful robe his wife had sent him. As he stood before the great fire, the warmth of the flames activated the ancient hydra poison. The effect was immediate and horrific. A sudden, searing, unimaginable pain shot through his body. The robe fused to his skin, and the poison began to burn him from within, a fire that could not be quenched. It was an excruciating, incurable agony, his very flesh seeming to boil upon his bones. Mad with a pain no mortal could comprehend, he went on a final, tragic rampage, uprooting trees by their roots. He saw the innocent messenger, Lichas, who had brought him the robe, and in his agony hurled the man into the sea. Back at their home, when Deianira learned that her love charm was in fact a horrific poison, she was overcome with guilt and took her own life. Heracles, knowing he was dying, was carried to the slopes of Mount Ota. In his final moments of clarity, he he took control of his own end. He ordered his sons to build him a massive funeral pyre. With his last reserves of strength, he helped them, tearing up pine trees and adding them to the great stack. He laid himself upon it, ready to end his torment. But no one, not even his own sons, dared to light the fire. They could not bring themselves to do it. Only a passing shepherd, a young man named Philoctetus, took pity on the dying hero and agreed to light the pyre. In a final act of gratitude, Heracles gifted the shepherd his legendary bow and his quiver of poison-tipped arrows. As the crackling flames of the immense pyre rose and began to consume his mortal body, a great thunderclap echoed from the heavens. A golden chariot, driven by the goddess Athena, descended through the clouds. A gentle, peaceful feeling of release filled the air as his mortal form was consumed by the fire, and his divine, immortal essence ascended, freed at last from a life of pain and labor. And so, the mortal journey of Hercules comes to a gentle close. Through fire, his pain was ended. Through divine will, his spirit was freed. He endured more suffering than any mortal could bear, and in the end, found his rightful place among the stars. It's a powerful reminder that even the greatest life, filled with strength and glory, ultimately seeks peace. I hope you've enjoyed this part of our story. If you're still with us, we'll now explore what came next for him, not as a man, but as a god. The flames of the pyre on Mount Ota did not consume him. They did not end him. Instead, they performed a final, miraculous act of purification. The fire burned away the last vestiges of his mortal self, the part that could feel pain, the part that was subject to poison and death. It refined him, separating the human from the divine, the ephemeral from the eternal, and what remained was pure spirit, a being of light and strength, ready for his final journey home. He rose with the fragrant smoke, ascending through the clear air of the Greek mountains. The world of men, with all its struggles and its fleeting joys, grew smaller and smaller below him. He passed through the veil of clouds that separates the earth from the heavens, and entered a realm of impossible beauty. This was Mount Olympus, the home of the gods. Everything here was bathed in a gentle, golden light that seemed to emanate not from a sun, but from the very substance of the place itself. It was a light that was warm but not hot, bright but not blinding. It was the light of immortality. A soft, celestial breeze drifted through the gleaming halls and sacred groves, carrying a scent of unknown flowers, a perfume that spoke of eternal spring. And beneath it all, a constant, beautiful music filled the air. It was the sound of the muses, lyres, and their ethereal singing, a melody that wove the stories of the cosmos into a harmonious song. The gods of the pantheon were there to greet him. They stood in all their majesty, their forms radiant and powerful. There was Apollo, his presence as bright as the sun. Artemis, with the quiet grace of the moonlit forest. Hermes, with a flicker of mischief in his eyes. And Athena, her gaze filled with a profound and ancient wisdom. At their head stood his father, Zeus, the king of the gods. There was no thunder in his expression now, only a deep and resonant pride. He looked upon Hercules, not as the troubled offspring of a mortal affair, but as a son who had surpassed every trial and earned his rightful place. He welcomed him with an embrace that felt like the foundation of the world, a father's love finally and fully expressed. This was his apotheosis, his deification. It was the ultimate reward for a lifetime of suffering, a final answer to the relentless persecution that had followed him from birth. On Olympus, he was given the food and drink of the gods, nectar and ambrosia. The taste was unlike anything from the mortal world, a flavor that was both sweet and profound. It sustained his new immortal form, filling him with a vigor that would never fade. He was no longer a man striving against his fate. He was a god, at peace in his eternal home. But one figure stood apart, her presence holding the key to his final peace. It was Hera, queen of the gods, the architect of all his pain. For his entire life, she had been his nemesis, a relentless force of divine fury. He had been the living symbol of her husband's infidelity, and she had made him pay for it with every fiber of her being. Yet, as he looked at her now, he saw no vengeance in her eyes. The hardness was gone, the anger had subsided. In its place was a look of serene acceptance, a quiet acknowledgement that the long war between them was finally over. The cycle of hatred had run its course. In a remarkable act of reconciliation, Hera officially ended her persecution of him. But she did more than simply declare a truce. She chose to undo the very premise of their conflict. She decided to make him her own. In a quiet and solemn ceremony, witnessed by the other Olympians, she formally adopted Hercules as her son. The ritual was deeply symbolic. Hercules, the mighty hero, crawled under her flowing robes and emerged on the other side. This act simulated a rebirth, a sacred moment that washed away the past. He was no longer the son of Alcmene, the mortal woman. He was now, in spirit and in law, the son of Hera. This act cleansed him of all past grievances, making him a true and undeniable part of the celestial family. To seal this newfound peace, Hera offered him the greatest gift she could. She gave him her own daughter, Hebe, as his immortal bride. Hebe was the goddess of youth, the very embodiment of eternal spring and vitality. She was beautiful, with a gentle spirit that perfectly complemented his immense strength. Their marriage was a symbol of his final state. It represented a life free from aging, free from decay, a life of endless vigor and peaceful contentment. On Olympus, Hercules was no longer a warrior, consumed by a need for atonement. His struggles were over. He was now a god of strength, protection, and heroic endeavor. His power now a source of security for the divine realm, not a curse upon himself. With Hebe, he found a peace he had never known in his mortal life. They had two divine children, sons named Alexiers and Anicetus. Their names were a testament to their father's new existence. Alexiers means he who wards off war, and Anicetus means the unconquerable. They were children of peace and invincibility, born not from struggle, but from reconciliation. Hercules settled into his new role with grace. He often served as a guardian of Olympus, his legendary strength now a shield for the gods. When giants or other cosmic threats rose to challenge the divine order, it was Hercules who stood ready, his power now a protective force used in concert with his family. He had found his place. The hero had come home. While Hercules enjoyed his newfound peace among the gods, his story was far from over in the mortal world. Down below, on the earth, he had reshaped with his labors. The people he had saved and inspired began to honor him in a way reserved for only the greatest figures. His legend was not fading into memory. It was just beginning to be written in stone and in prayer. The memory of Hercules did not simply live on in songs and stories. It became a living faith. Throughout the hills and valleys of Greece, and in the heart of its bustling cities, people began to worship the hero who had walked among them. He became one of the most popular and beloved figures in the entire Greek world, a testament to his incredible journey and his connection to humanity. His worship was widespread, touching the lives of everyone from the humble farmer to the aspiring athlete and the powerful ruler. He was a hero for all people. What made the cult of Hercules so unique was its dual nature. He was not simply a god, nor was he merely a celebrated mortal. He was both. This was reflected in the very rituals used to honor him. He received sacrifices as a theos, a true Olympian god, and also as a heros, a deceased hero who retained his connection to the earth. This duality allowed people to connect with him on multiple levels. He was the mighty deity on Olympus, but he was also the man who had known suffering, who understood their struggles intimately. This unique dual status was expressed in the timing and manner of the sacrifices. As a god, Heracles would receive a sacrifice in the morning as the sun rose, bathing the world in light. At an altar, a priest would offer up an animal, carefully turning its head to point skyward, directing the offering to the heavens, to his celestial home on Olympus. These were rites of hope and praise, acknowledging his divine power and his seat among the immortals. The atmosphere would be bright, the prayers filled with reverence for his godhood. But he was also honored as a hero, a mortal man who had died and whose spirit lingered. In this capacity, he would receive a sacrifice in the evening as dusk settled over the land and the world grew quiet and reflective. For this ritual, the offering would be made with the animal's head pointed toward the ground. This directed the sacrifice downwards to the earth that had been his home and the underworld he had conquered. These were more intimate, solemn rites, honoring his mortal past, his labors, his pain, and his ultimate victory over death. The prayers offered here were often more personal, spoken to the one who had bled and suffered just as they did. His temples and shrines, known as Heraclea, were found all over the Greek world. In great cities, there might be magnificent stone temples, adorned with frescoes depicting his famous labors. The flickering light of oil lamps would illuminate scenes of his battles with the Nemean lion or the Lernaean hydra, timeless reminders of his strength. But his presence was not confined to grand structures. You could find small, rustic shrines by the side of a lonely road, or a simple stone altar in a local gymnasium. Each one was a sacred space, a point of connection for the community. Generations of worshippers would come and go, their hands smoothing the stone of a temple step until it shone, a physical testament to centuries of devotion. He was seen above all as a protector of humanity. He was a guardian, a figure you could turn to when facing the dangers of the world. Because he had fought monsters and tamed the wilderness, people prayed to him for safety on their journeys. A traveler setting out on a perilous road would stop at a small shrine, leaving a simple offering and murmuring a quiet prayer for protection against bandits or wild animals. His presence offered a sense of security in a world filled with chaos. He was also the patron of athletes. The gymnasium, the place of physical training, was his sacred domain. Young men, training their bodies for competition, would do so under the watchful eye of a statue of Hercules. They would see in him the ultimate embodiment of physical prowess and disciplined strength. Before an important contest, an athlete would anoint himself with oil, his mind focused, offering a prayer to the hero for the strength and endurance to achieve victory. It was said that the original Olympic Games were founded by Hercules himself, forever linking his name to the pursuit of athletic excellence and the glory of peaceful competition. His worship was deeply personal. Unlike the distant and often fearsome high gods like Zeus or Poseidon, Hercules was an accessible figure. People felt he could understand their pleas because he himself had known the depths of human suffering. He had been cursed, driven mad, forced into servitude, and betrayed. He knew grief and he knew exhaustion. This made him a compassionate ear for the prayers of ordinary people. They prayed to him for the strength to endure a difficult harvest, for the courage to face a personal trial, and for help against the evils and injustices of the world. The sound of these low, murmuring prayers was a constant hum at his many shrines. The reverence for him also served a political purpose. Many of the great aristocratic families of Greece, and later of Rome, claimed direct descent from the hero. By tracing their lineage back to a son of Zeus, they could legitimize their rule, framing their power not as a matter of conquest, but of divine inheritance. To be a descendant of Hercules was to carry a spark of his strength and his right to lead. The air at his altars was thick with the scent of burning laurel leaves and roasting meat, a fragrant offering that rose to the heavens, carrying with it the hopes, fears, and gratitude of a people who saw in this hero the very best of themselves. The reverence for Hercules was not confined to Greece. His story had a power that transcended borders and cultures. As the centuries passed and the influence of Greece began to wane, a new power was rising in the West. The Roman Republic, and later the Empire, began to spread its influence across the Mediterranean. As the Romans encountered Greek culture, they did not destroy it. They absorbed it, adapted it, and made it their own. And so, the great Greek hero, Heracles, would find a new home and a new name in the heart of Rome. The spirit of his story would be adopted and adapted by one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. The Romans first learned of Heracles through their contact with the Etruscans in northern Italy and the Greek colonies to the south. They heard the incredible tales of his strength and his labors, and the story resonated deeply with their own cultural values. They adopted him into their pantheon, but they gave him a Latin name, Hercules. And in this transition, something subtle but significant changed. While the Romans knew the stories of his tragic life, their focus shifted. The Roman Hercules was less a figure of intense suffering and tragic fate, and more a symbol of triumphant victory and divine strength. He was a conqueror, a champion, a perfect embodiment of Roman power. In the bustling city of Rome, two major cult centers were dedicated to him. The most ancient and revered was the Era Maxima, the greatest altar. It stood in the Forum Boarium, the city's cattle market, a noisy, crowded place filled with the sounds of commerce and daily life. According to legend, the altar was founded by Hercules himself. The story tells that after he had taken the cattle of the monster Geryon as his 10th labor, he was passing through Italy. While he slept, a fire-breathing giant named Cacus, who lived in a nearby cave, stole some of the precious livestock. Enraged by the theft, Hercules tore the top off the mountain where Cacus was hiding, found the monster, and defeated him in a mighty battle. This story was more than just another tale of monster slaying, because it involved the recovery of stolen goods. It made Hercules a patron of commerce and the marketplace. Roman merchants, setting out on a risky trade venture or celebrating a successful deal, would come to the Era Maxima to make an offering. It was a common practice for them to tithe 1/10 of their profits to the altar of Hercules, seeking his continued favor and protection for their wealth. This connected him directly to the economic heart of Rome, making him a very practical and important god in the lives of its citizens. His name became woven into the fabric of everyday language. The phrase Mahercule was a common oath used by people from all walks of life. It was an exclamation of surprise or an affirmation of a statement, much like saying, "By Hercules," or "My goodness," today. The fact that his name was used so casually shows just how deeply integrated he was into the Roman consciousness. He was not a distant, abstract deity, but a constant presence in their world. This powerful image of Hercules as a symbol of ultimate strength and divine favor was not lost on Rome's rulers. Roman emperors, who often sought to present themselves as living gods, found in Hercules the perfect model. The Emperor Commodus, in the late 2nd century AD, took this identification to an extreme. He famously had himself depicted as Hercules in numerous statues. You can still see them today. The cold, impressive marble capturing the emperor's face on the hero's powerful body, complete with the iconic lion skin draped over his head and the gnarled club in his hand. It was a powerful piece of political propaganda, a clear statement that the emperor possessed the superhuman strength and divine backing of the greatest hero of all. Another important site of his worship was the beautiful circular temple of Hercules, Victor, Hercules, the Conqueror. It stood near the Era Maxima, a quiet, reverent oasis in the busy city. Here, the focus was on his role as a guarantor of victory, both in commerce and in war. Yet, the Roman cult of Hercules had its own unique rules. At the Era Maxima, for instance, women were strictly forbidden from participating in the rites. This stood in contrast to many of the Greek cults, and it suggests that his Roman identity was tied to specifically male domains of life, business, politics, and warfare. The air inside his temples was heavy with the distinct smell of Roman incense, perhaps richer with frankincense, a scent different from the lighter aromas of a Greek shrine. Ultimately, it was this Roman interpretation of Hercules that became the dominant one passed down through Western culture. The image of the triumphant, supremely powerful hero, less burdened by the tragic madness of his Greek counterpart, was the one that endured most strongly. He was no longer just a Greek hero who became a god. He was a Roman symbol of power, victory, and civilization itself. From a cursed Greek demigod to a revered Roman god of victory, his image continued to evolve, becoming more than a character in a story, but a fundamental archetype of heroism itself, a blueprint for countless heroes to come. And so, the story of Hercules transcends the specific beliefs of the Greeks and Romans. It settles into the deeper layers of our collective imagination, becoming a timeless blueprint for what it means to be a hero. His life, with all its impossible trials, its tragic flaws, and its final, glorious triumph, provides the structure for the hero's journey, a pattern that we see echoed in our stories even to this day. When we look closely at his myth, we are looking at a foundational narrative of Western culture. Hercules embodies the classic hero's journey. He has a miraculous birth, the son of a god and a mortal, setting him apart from the very beginning. He faces a series of impossible trials, the 12 labors, which push him to the absolute limits of human and divine endurance. In his journey to the underworld, he literally confronts and overcomes death, and in the end, he achieves the ultimate reward, a transformation from a suffering mortal into an immortal god. This arc, this pattern of trial and transcendence, has become a fundamental template for storytelling, from ancient epics to modern blockbusters. The quiet rustle of pages in a library is filled with the echoes of his journey. On a symbolic level, his story represents the great struggle of civilization against the forces of chaos. Each of his labors can be seen as a metaphor for this process. When he tames the Nemean lion, he is conquering the wild, primal savagery that threatens human settlements. When he destroys the Lernean hydra, he is overcoming the kind of untamed, chaotic force of nature that can never be truly defeated, only managed through ingenuity and perseverance. His entire life is spent making the world safer for humanity, establishing order where there was once only danger. Yet, what makes him such an enduring and compelling figure is his complexity. He is not a perfect, flawless champion. He is a deeply human character. He is a protector of the innocent, a savior of cities, and a friend to the downtrodden. But he is also prone to terrible fits of destructive rage, a tragic flaw inherited from the divine persecution he endures. This internal conflict, this tension between his noble intentions and his capacity for violence, makes him incredibly relatable. He is a reminder that even the strongest among us have weaknesses, and that the greatest battles are often the ones fought within ourselves. His legacy is also embedded in our language. The 12 labors has become a cultural trope, a common phrase we use to describe any series of incredibly difficult tasks. When we speak of a Herculean task, we are invoking his name to describe a challenge that seems to require superhuman strength. This linguistic footprint shows how deeply his story is ingrained in our way of thinking about struggle and achievement. Visually, his image is one of the most recognizable in all of Western art. From the simple, stylized figures on ancient Greek pottery to the magnificent, muscular forms of Renaissance sculptures, his presence is unforgettable. As you walk through a silent museum hall, the feeling of cool marble under your fingertips as you observe a sculpture of the hero connects you to a tradition of artistry thousands of years old. In a great painting, the colors, rich and deep, capture his power and his pathos. And even today, the flickering light of a movie screen often shows a new, modern interpretation of his ancient myth, proving his story's timeless appeal. Philosophers, too, found deep meaning in his story. The Stoics, in particular, saw Hercules as the ultimate role model. They looked past his brute strength and saw a figure who endured immense suffering with fortitude and unwavering virtue. A popular philosophical tale from antiquity, known as the Choice of Hercules, illustrates this perfectly. In the story, a young Hercules is at a crossroads when he is approached by two goddesses. One, Voluptus, offers him a life of ease, pleasure, and comfort. The other, Virtues, offers him a life of hardship, struggle, and glory. Hercules, of course, chooses the difficult path of virtue. This story became a powerful allegory for the human condition, a reminder that true fulfillment comes not from avoiding pain, but from facing challenges with courage. His myth also explores the timeless tension between fate and free will. He is a victim of fate, cursed by Hera before he is even born. Yet, he is also a figure of immense will. He does not simply surrender to his curse. He actively chooses to pursue atonement. He seeks out the oracle, he accepts his labors, and he chooses, again and again, to persevere against impossible odds. His story suggests that while we may not be able to control the circumstances of our lives, we always have the power to choose how we respond to them. Ultimately, Hercules becomes an archetype of humanity's incredible potential to overcome the darkest circumstances through sheer perseverance. He is a symbol of resilience. He shows us that strength is not merely physical, but is also a matter of spirit and will. He is a testament to the idea that we can endure unimaginable hardship and not only survive, but be transformed by it. His final reward, a seat among the gods, is a powerful metaphor for achieving a state of peace and grace through the crucible of suffering. A quiet, final tribute can be seen in the night sky, in the form of the constellation Hercules, a collection of distant stars that trace the shape of the kneeling hero. And so, the story of Hercules becomes a permanent constellation in our collective sky. He is more than a myth. He is a reflection of our own struggles and our own capacity for strength and resilience. A timeless reminder that the measure of a life is not the absence of hardship, but the courage to face it. Every challenge overcome, every fear confronted, and every obstacle navigated carves the contours of true resilience. It is in the crucible of adversity that strength is forged, wisdom is gained, and character is truly revealed. Life's most profound lessons are often learned not in moments of ease, but when we are pushed to our limits and discover the depths of our own fortitude. Thank you for joining me on this reflective part of our journey as we consider the profound and enduring significance of facing life's trials with unwavering courage. As the story of Hercules settles into its constellation, our view begins to gently widen. His life, as grand as it was not lived in isolation. He was part of a generation of wonders, an era when gods and mortals walked a closer path, and the world was alive with figures of incredible destiny. This was the age of heroes, and so, for a little while longer, we will drift through this mythic landscape, exploring the stories of those who lived alongside him. These are not tales of contest, but of context, a quiet tapestry of other lives, other quests, and other fates, woven together to form the rich and dreamlike world of ancient Greece. Our first story begins not with a roar of strength, but with a whispered prophecy. In the kingdom of Argos, a king named Acrisius was given a terrifying piece of knowledge from the oracle. He was told that he would one day be killed by his own grandson. Fear took root in the king's heart, a cold and creeping dread that twisted his love for his only daughter, Danae, into something sharp and cruel. To prevent the prophecy from ever coming to pass, he built a chamber of bronze, a room with no doors and no windows, and there he locked his daughter away from the world, a prisoner of her own father's fear. But fate cannot be so easily cheated, and the gods see even into the darkest of places. Zeus, the king of Olympus, looked down upon the lonely princess and was moved by her plight. He visited her not as a man, nor as a beast, but as something ethereal and beautiful. He became a gentle shower of golden rain, a cascade of shimmering light that seeped through the cracks in the bronze roof. This divine light pooled in the darkness, and from this gentle union, a child was conceived. In the heart of her prison, Danae gave birth to a son, and she named him Perseus. When King Acrisius heard the cries of the infant, his fear turned to panic. He would not dare to directly kill the child, for the boy was clearly touched by the gods. So instead, he chose the sea as his instrument. He had a great wooden chest built, and inside it he placed his daughter and her newborn son. The chest was sealed and cast into the waves, a tiny, fragile vessel at the mercy of the vast and uncaring ocean. For days and nights the chest drifted, The only sound was the constant, gentle rocking of the sea, a lonely lullaby for the infant hero and the soft weeping of his mother. But they were not fated to perish. The currents, guided by a divine hand, carried the chest to the shores of the island of Seriphos. A kind fisherman found them and took them in, giving them a home and a life of simple peace. Yet this peace was not to last. The island's king, a cruel man named Polydex, grew to desire Danae. Seeing the young and protective Perseus as an obstacle, he devised a plan to be rid of him forever. He announced his own wedding and demanded a gift from every citizen. Knowing Perseus had nothing to give, Polydex mocked him, suggesting he bring back something truly impressive: the head of the Gorgon, Medusa. It was a death sentence, disguised as a quest. Medusa was one of 3 monstrous sisters, the only one who was mortal. Her hair was a mass of writhing, venomous snakes, and her gaze was so terrible that any living thing that looked directly upon her would instantly be turned to stone. But Perseus, in his youthful pride, accepted the challenge, and because he was a son of Zeus, the gods of Olympus would not let him go unaided. 2 great deities came to his side. The clever messenger god, Hermes, gave him a pair of winged sandals, allowing him to travel through the air with the speed of thought. He also gave him a sickle, forged of a substance so hard it could never be broken. The wise goddess Athena, his half-sister, gave him a shield of polished bronze, its surface so bright it shone like a mirror. She instructed him carefully on how to use it. He was also guided to the Hesperides nymphs, who guarded a sacred garden, and they gave him 2 more gifts: a magical bag, the Cabizes, which could safely contain the Gorgon's head, and the cap of invisibility. With these divine gifts, Perseus flew to the ends of the earth, to the dark and desolate land where the Gorgons lived. The feeling of the wind rushing past him was a strange and exhilarating sensation as he soared through the clouds. He found the sisters sleeping in their lair, the air filled with the constant, soft hissing of the snakes that formed Medusa's terrible hair. He knew he could not look at her, so he turned his back, guided only by the reflection in his polished shield. He saw her sleeping face in the bronze, a tragic and monstrous sight. Moving silently, he raised the unbreakable sickle, and in one swift motion he beheaded her. From her severed neck, 2 beings sprang into existence, the children of her union with the god Poseidon. One was the giant Chrysor, and the other was Pegasus, the magnificent winged horse. Without a moment's pause, Perseus placed the still dangerous head into the magical bag. The weight of it was strange and heavy, a deadly trophy that pulsed with a cold, stony power. He put on the cap of invisibility, and unseen by Medusa's waking sisters, he rose into the air and began his long journey home. Along the way, he saw a beautiful maiden chained to a rock by the sea, an offering to a great sea monster named Cetus. This was the Princess Andromeda. Perseus, his heart moved by her beauty and her terror, descended from the sky. He battled the monster and freed her, and in time she became his wife. When he finally returned to Seriphos, he found that King Polydex was still tormenting his mother. Perseus strode into the king's court, declared that he had brought the promised gift, and drew Medusa's head from the bag. The king and his cruel followers looked upon it, and in an instant they were turned to lifeless stone. Perseus had completed his quest. He had saved his mother and won a bride. In time, the old prophecy was also fulfilled. Years later, while competing in a discus throwing contest, Perseus threw the heavy disc with all his might. It flew far and wide, but a sudden gust of wind sent it veering off course into the crowd of spectators. There it struck and killed an old man. That man was his grandfather, King Acrisius, who had come to the games in disguise. And so, fate, which had been set in motion so long ago, finally had its way, not through malice, but by a simple, tragic accident. Perseus's journey was one of divine aid and destiny fulfilled. But other heroes, like the great king of Athens, would rely just as much on their own intelligence and courage. Our gaze now shifts to the sun-drenched land of Attica and to the city of Athens. Here we find the story of Theseus, the city's great founder hero. His tale is not one of distant, divine quests, but of clearing the land of monsters and weaving a city together through courage and intellect. His origins were shrouded in a small mystery. He was the son of a princess, but his father was either the mortal king Aegeus of Athens or the mighty sea god Poseidon himself. Theseus grew up in the quiet town of Troezen, raised by his mother. King Aegeus, before leaving, had placed his own sword and a pair of sandals under a massive, unmovable rock. He told the boy's mother that when their son was strong enough to lift the great stone and retrieve the items, he should then travel to Athens to claim his place as heir. For years, the rock stood as a silent challenge. The young Theseus would place his hands against it, feeling the cool, smooth stone, pushing with all his might, and for years it would not budge. But he grew, and his strength grew with him, until the day came when he set his shoulders against it, pushed, and felt the great weight finally shift. Beneath it lay his inheritance. With the sword and sandals, he set out on the dangerous road to Athens. He chose not the easy path by sea, but the treacherous one by land, for he wished to make a name for himself. The road was plagued by bandits and monsters, and Theseus decided to clear it, one villain at a time. This journey became his own version of the labors. He faced cruel men like Procrustes, who would stretch or cut his victims to fit a terrible iron bed, and Siren, who would kick travelers off a cliff to be eaten by a giant turtle. In each encounter, Theseus used a combination of strength and cunning, defeating each villain with their own wicked methods. He arrived in Athens not as an unknown boy, but as a celebrated hero. In the city, however, he found a deep sadness. Athens was living under the shadow of a terrible tribute demanded by King Minos of Crete years earlier. Minos's son had been killed in Athens, and in retaliation, the powerful king demanded a grim payment every 9 years. 7 of Athens's finest youths and 7 of its most beautiful maidens were to be sent to Crete, where they would be sacrificed to a monstrous creature, the Minotaur. The Minotaur was a creature of horror, with the head and tail of a bull, but the body of a man. It was born of a curse, and lived in the center of the labyrinth, a vast and inescapable maze built by the master inventor Daedalus. The corridors of the labyrinth were dark and twisting, filled with the smell of damp stone and a faint bestial odor that grew stronger the deeper one went. To be sent into the maze was to be lost in darkness and then devoured. Theseus, his heart breaking for the weeping families, declared that he would put an end to this horror. He volunteered to go as one of the 7 youths, vowing to enter the labyrinth and slay the beast. His father, King Aegeus, was filled with dread, but he could not dissuade him. They agreed upon a signal. The ship that carried the tributes always flew a black sail, a symbol of mourning. If Theseus was successful, he was to change the sail to a white one for the return journey, so that his father, watching from the cliffs, would see the sign of victory from afar. When the Athenians arrived in Crete, the noble bearing of Theseus caught the eye of King Minos's daughter, the Princess Ariadne. She fell in love with the brave young prince, and could not bear the thought of him being lost in the maze. She sought out the labyrinth's architect, Daedalus, who took pity on her and gave her a secret. That night, Ariadne went to Theseus and gave him 2 gifts, a sword and a simple ball of thread. She told him to tie one end of the thread to the entrance of the labyrinth and to let it unspool as he walked. It would be his only guide back to the light. Theseus entered the oppressive darkness of the maze. As he went deeper, he could hear the low, angry bellow of the Minotaur echoing through the stone corridors, seeming to come from all directions at once. But in his hand, he held the thin, reassuring feel of Ariadne's thread, a fragile lifeline connecting him to the world outside. He followed the sounds until he reached the center of the maze, and there he confronted the beast. He fought with courage and skill, and finally he slew the Minotaur, ending the curse of Crete forever. Using the thread, he guided himself and the other young Athenians out of the labyrinth's suffocating darkness. They fled to their ship, taking Ariadne with them, and set sail for home. But in the joy and confusion of their victory, a tragic mistake was made. Theseus, his mind perhaps on his journey or his future, forgot his promise to his father. On the deck of the ship lay the white sail, neatly folded, a forgotten symbol of his success. The ship sailed on, its black sail still flying high against the sky. In Athens, King Aegeus stood on the cliffs day after day, his eyes scanning the horizon. When he finally saw the ship approaching, his heart soared with hope, only to be shattered. He saw the black sail, believing his son was dead. The old king was overcome with a grief so profound that he threw himself from the cliffs into the sea below. And from that day on, the sea was named the Aegean in his memory. Theseus returned not just as a hero, but as the new king of Athens, his reign beginning with a deep and personal sorrow. He was a hero of the city, a bringer of order. But some heroic journeys were not solitary, but undertaken as a grand company, like the epic voyage of the Argo. Our story now drifts out to the open sea, to the deck of the most famous ship in all of Greek mythology. We gently board the legendary Argo and join Jason and his crew of heroes on their epic quest for the Golden Fleece. This is a tale of a grand sea voyage, of teamwork against impossible odds, and of the powerful magic of a foreign princess. It is a journey that even the mighty Hercules was, for a short time, a part of. The story begins in the kingdom of Iolcus, where a young prince named Jason was the rightful heir to the throne. But his uncle, a ruthless man named Peleus, had usurped the throne and lived in constant fear of being overthrown. An oracle had warned Peleus to beware of a man who would come to him wearing only one sandal. Years later, Jason, now a young man, arrived in Iolcus to claim his birthright. On his journey, he had carried an old woman across a flooded river, losing one of his sandals in the mud. And so he stood before his uncle, a man with one sandal, the very image from the prophecy. Peleus, hiding his fear behind a welcoming smile, agreed to give up the throne, but only if Jason could complete one seemingly impossible quest. He was to sail to the distant, unknown land of Colchis, at the very edge of the world, and bring back a legendary treasure, the Golden Fleece. It was the fleece of a magical winged ram, and it was guarded by a sleepless dragon. Peleus was certain that Jason would never return. But Jason was not deterred. He sent out a call across all of Greece, assembling a crew of the greatest heroes of the age. The names of those who answered were a roll call of legends. There was Hercules, with his unmatched strength. There was the musician Orpheus, whose lyre could charm rocks and trees. There were the twin heroes, Castor and Pollux, and many more, a company of 50 heroes. They were called the Argonauts, named after their magnificent ship, the Argo. The Argo itself was a marvel. It was built with the help of the goddess Athena, and it was said to be the fastest ship ever to sail the seas. Into its prow, a piece of speaking timber was fitted, taken from the sacred oak trees of the oracle of Dodona. This magical prow could whisper prophecies and offer guidance on their long and perilous journey. As they set sail, the gentle creaking of the ship's timbers and the rhythmic splash of 50 oars dipping into the blue sea was a sound of hope and high adventure. Their journey was filled with challenges. They had to navigate the Symplegades, the clashing rocks that would smash any ship that tried to pass between them. They saved a tormented prophet named Phineus from the Harpies, foul bird-like creatures that stole his food. Throughout their trials, the enchanting music of Orpheus's lyre often saved them. Its beautiful melodies, soothing savage beasts and calming treacherous waters. It was during this voyage that Hercules left the quest. His young companion, a boy named Hylas, went ashore to fetch water from a spring. The water nymphs who lived there were captivated by his beauty and pulled him down into the water with them to live forever in their underwater grotto. Hercules was overcome with grief. He plunged into the forest, shouting Hylas's name, his desperate search making him oblivious to everything else. The Argo, with a favorable wind, had to sail on without him, leaving the great hero behind. After many more adventures, the Argonauts finally reached the distant land of Chalcis. Its king Aeetes was furious that they had come to take his most prized possession. He agreed to give Jason the fleece, but only if he could complete a series of impossible tasks. He had to yoke a pair of fire-breathing bulls with bronze hooves and plow a field with them. The warm, heavy breath of the great beasts was a terrifying thing to behold. Then he had to sow the plowed field with dragon's teeth, from which would spring an army of stone warriors that he had to defeat. It seemed hopeless, but help came from an unexpected source. The king's own daughter, the young princess Medea, was a powerful sorceress and a priestess of the goddess Hecate. The gods had caused her to fall deeply in love with Jason. In the dead of night, she met with him, her voice a quiet whisper as she spoke her magical incantations. She gave him a protective ointment that would make him immune to the bull's fire. She told him the secret of defeating the stone warriors, to throw a rock into their midst, which would cause them to turn on and destroy each other. With Medea's magic, Jason succeeded in his tasks, but King Aeetes had no intention of honoring his word. That night, Medea led Jason to the dark, sacred grove where the golden fleece was kept. It hung on the branch of an ancient oak tree, its divine wool casting a brilliant, golden glow that lit up the clearing. Guarding it was a huge serpent, a dragon that never slept. Once again, Medea used her magic, chanting a soft lullaby and sprinkling sleeping herbs that finally caused the great dragon's eyes to close. Jason seized the fleece, and together with Medea, they raced back to the Argo and escaped from Chalcis. The journey of the Argonauts was a success, a tale of a group effort. But the final hero of our age is perhaps the most solitary of all, defined by a singular, tragic choice. Our journey through the age of heroes comes to a close on the wind-swept plains of Troy. Here, under a vast and unforgiving sky, we find our final hero. His name is Achilles. He is the greatest warrior of his generation, a man who moves like a storm of destruction on the battlefield. But his story is not about wrestling monsters or solving puzzles. It is a quieter, more human story. It is a gentle and profound meditation on glory, honor, the consuming power of rage, and the solemn choice between a long, quiet life and a short, glorious one. Achilles was born from the union of a mortal king Peleus and a beautiful sea nymph named Thetis. Because his mother was a goddess, she desperately wanted to protect her child from the fate of all mortals, death. In a secret ritual, she took the infant Achilles to the river Styx, the mystical river that flowed through the underworld, whose waters were said to grant invulnerability. She dipped her beloved son into the black, swirling currents, but she held him fast by his heel. The waters washed over his entire body, making his skin impervious to any weapon. But the small spot where her fingers gripped his heel remained untouched, mortal, and vulnerable. A prophecy hung over Achilles' life, offering him a clear and difficult choice. He could choose to stay home, to avoid the great Trojan War. If he did, he would live a long, happy, and peaceful life, surrounded by family. But his name would be forgotten after his death. Or he could choose to go to Troy. If he did, he would win undying glory. His name would be remembered and celebrated for all of time, but he would die young upon the battlefield. Achilles, with all the fire of his youth, chose glory. He sailed to Troy as the leader of the Myrmidons, a fearsome and elite band of warriors. On the battlefield, he was untouchable, a whirlwind of bronze and skill. The sound of thousands of swords and shields clashing filled the air. But over it all, the war cries of Achilles rose as he drove the Trojan forces back again and again. He was the spearhead of the Greek army, their greatest champion. The salty, wind-swept smell of the war camp by the sea was his home for 10 long years. But the defining moment of his story, as told in the epic poem The Iliad, is not a battle. It is an argument. The commander of the Greek forces, Agamemnon, publicly dishonored Achilles by taking away his war prize, a captive woman named Briseis. For a hero like Achilles, honor was more valuable than life itself. This insult ignited a terrible rage, a menace so profound that it threatened to destroy the entire Greek cause. In his anger, Achilles withdrew from the fighting. He sat in his tent by the sea, refusing to lift a finger to help, even as the Trojans, led by their great prince Hector, began to overwhelm the Greek forces. The silence in Achilles' tent was heavy and profound. His comrades begged him to return, but his pride would not allow it. Then his dearest friend, Patroclus, heartbroken to see the Greeks being slaughtered, asked to borrow Achilles' famous armor. He hoped that the sight of it would frighten the Trojans and give the Greeks a chance to regroup. Achilles agreed, but warned him not to press the attack all the way to the walls of Troy. Patroclus, caught up in the heat of battle, forgot this warning. He fought bravely, but was ultimately killed by Hector. When the news of Patroclus' death reached Achilles, his world collapsed. His rage against Agamemnon was instantly replaced by a grief so vast and an anger so absolute that it shook the heavens. He would now fight not for glory, nor for the Greeks, but for revenge. His mother, Thetis, seeing his sorrow, had the god of the forge, Hephaestus, craft him a new set of armor. The sight of it gleaming in the firelight was magnificent and terrible, a promise of the doom that was to come. Achilles returned to the battle, a man consumed by grief. He hunted for Hector with a singular, terrifying focus. He found him, and they fought a legendary duel before the walls of Troy. Achilles, the greater warrior, killed the Trojan prince, but his rage was not satisfied. In an act of profound disrespect, he tied Hector's body to the back of his chariot and dragged it in the dust around the city walls for days. The story could have ended there, with a hero lost in his own rage, but it does not. One night, the old king of Troy, Priam, Hector's father, came alone and in secret to Achilles' tent. He knelt before the man who had killed his son and humbly begged for the body back so that he could give it a proper burial. As Achilles looked at the grieving old king, he saw his own father in him. He thought of his own father, who would soon lose his own son, and in that moment, something broke inside him. His rage subsided, replaced by a shared sense of human sorrow. He and Priam wept together, two enemies united in their grief. This quiet, gentle peace was his finest moment. Achilles returned Hector's body. He had found his humanity again. Soon after, his own fate came for him. As the prophecy foretold, he was killed on the battlefield. The Trojan prince Paris, a far lesser warrior, shot an arrow from his bow, but it was guided by the hand of the god Apollo. The arrow flew straight and true across the chaos of the battle and struck Achilles in his one vulnerable spot, his heel. The greatest warrior of the age fell, his short, glorious life complete. The age of heroes gives us a rich tapestry of stories, each one a different reflection on strength, fate, and what it means to live a memorable life. From the divine quests of Perseus to the human rage of Achilles, these tales have echoed through the ages, becoming a soft, familiar backdrop to our world. I hope they have brought you some calm and comfort tonight. Thank you so much for joining us here at Sleeping Scribe. If you've enjoyed our journey, please consider liking and subscribing, as it truly helps our community grow. But for now, all that is left to do is rest. May your mind be calm and your sleep be deep and peaceful. Good night.